Hello everyone and welcome to your very first science fair lesson. Today we're going to be going over some of our introductory topics as well as some questions that you may have about science fair. For now we're going to start with your opener, and on the slides it looks like this, but you actually have it in your notes. So you should have a document that looks kind of like the one I have on screen. You might have it printed out in front of you, or it might be given to you virtually by your teacher, but you'll see the same questions in those notes packets so that you can follow along with my slides. Let's go back to our slideshow. Your first opener, and this is kind of just to get your brain warmed up and thinking about science fair, go ahead and write in your packet, what do you already know about science fair? You can go ahead and pause the video so that you have enough time to answer this question. Coming back for our second question, what questions do you have about science fair? And again, go ahead and pause the video so that you have enough time to answer. You might already know a lot about science fair. You may have heard about it in a book or a movie, or you may have done it already. Science fair is a great way to practice and celebrate your science skills. It's also a fun way to try an experiment that you wouldn't do in a normal science class. One of the really big benefits about science fair is that you get to control what your experiment is as an individual student. So you actually will get to see your classmates doing a variety of experiments. You're not all working on the same thing at the same time. This also gives you a chance to explore some scientific things that you have interest in that you might not cover in your normal class. Before we move on with our notes, I'm going to go over some frequently asked questions. These may be ones that you wrote down in your packet, or you might just want to listen along to get some additional information. The most common one, and usually the one that gets asked first, is what is science fair? Because some of us aren't familiar with it. Science fair is an event where students show their process and findings from conducting an experiment. Students make a prediction, test the prediction with an experiment, explain their observations, and share with the school judges. The follow-up question to that is, what do science fair judges do? If you're not familiar with science fair, judges actually come in to listen to presentations. So science fair judges are community members who observe and score student presentations. They may be other teachers at your school or people with a STEM career. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics or medicine. So if you are doing a competitive science fair, these judge scores might help your teacher pick a first, second, and third place or other prizes depending on how your school is doing it. If your school is competing against other schools, your scores may be shared within a bigger network, or it just helps your teacher see how effective your presentation was. And another really common one when I've taught this before is, will I have to present my project in front of a bunch of people? The answer to this is most likely not. If your school is having an in-person science fair, you will most likely just present to your judge or visitors at your table. Usually only a couple people are visiting your table at a time. So if you're doing an in-person science fair, you might be repeating your presentation multiple times, but probably not to a large group of people. It's more like a one-on-one or presenting to just a few people. If you are doing a virtual science fair, then you will create a video presentation to send to judges. This way judges can watch your presentation at home and send your scores back to your teacher. And the last frequently asked question is, how do I choose an experiment? This is actually what we are working on during this lesson. You will get to see a bunch of questions that you can choose from, as well as directions on how to write your own if you have a different idea. Usually when we start an experiment, we have to start with a question. And that leads us to our objective for today's lesson. An objective for a lesson is what you should be able to accomplish by the end in order to be ready for the next one. So our objective for today is, I can choose a testable question for my science fair project. And this question that you choose is going to guide the rest of your science fair process for you. Starting off with some background information, what is a testable question? A testable question is a question that can only be answered by conducting an experiment. All science experiments begin with a testable question. A testable question does not usually end up in a lab report or science presentation, but it's a helpful starting point when doing a science fair project. When you're doing your science fair project, you will actually be doing a lab report. It's just broken up into pieces. A lab report is a formal paper showing the findings of a science experiment, just like a science fair project is. You'll probably see a lot of those when you get to high school or even when you do science classes in college. Let's look at an example of a testable question. An example of a testable question would be, which brand of potato chips has the least grease? You might be surprised that this counts as a testable question because it doesn't seem like something that you'd really work with in a science class, but it is a testable question and would make a great science fair experiment. In order to answer this question, I would have to design an experiment to test the amount of grease in each brand. I can't figure it out just by looking at the ingredients list. So I know that this question is testable because I would have to do an experiment in order to find the answer. If, for example, instead I just said which brands of potato chips have canola oil in them, that's not a testable question because I can figure that out by just looking at the ingredients list. I don't have to do an experiment. Another example of a non-testable question would be, can I jump higher than 3 feet? In order to answer this question, I would only have to jump once and answer yes or no. While this question might be personally interesting to me, it does not need an experiment to answer it. Sometimes I've had students ask if they can do questions kind of like this one, more along the lines of, can my question be, can I run a mile in this amount of time, or something else kind of PE or gym related. But it's not a testable question because you don't have to design an experiment in order to answer it. You just do it and the answer is yes or no. And even though you could train in order to set goals like that, that's not the same as running an experiment. So remember, a testable question can only be solved by doing an experiment. At this point, you're going to go ahead and open up the list of testable questions that you can choose from. Choose one to be your science fair question and add it to your notes. I'll go ahead and show you what this looks like on my screen. Yours may look slightly different, but your teacher will have either posted this for you online or you will have a printed copy in front of you. If you have the printed copy, it's going to look slightly different than the one that's on my screen. When you open up the document, you'll be able to see questions sorted by topic. You can see we have some biology ones, physics, chemistry, psychology, or things in another category. You'll also get to see them sorted by materials, and this will become important later because you're going to have to write a materials list. So you can even check to see, hey, maybe I have all of the materials for certain questions in my house already, and that would make it really easy for me to do. Or you can kind of plan ahead and see, some of these questions need a special order or an order form in order to get them filled out. At this point, you can go ahead and pause the video here so that you have time to check out that list of testable questions and then come back to continue. Another additional thing after you've perused that list, if none of those questions appeal to you, which I'm sure some of you have looked through that list and decided that you'd rather do something else, you can always write your own testable question. Just make sure you keep these rules in mind. It must be testable. Again, that means it needs an experiment in order to find the answer. Your experiment cannot be a personal preference survey, meaning that if you can find the answer just by asking people questions about their preferences, it doesn't count as an experiment. An example of someone trying to do this that I've seen in the past is I had a student who wanted to know if there was any correlation between people's age and their favorite color. However, the only way to figure that out was just to send out a survey for people to take and then answer yes or no. And that doesn't really count as an experiment. So you need to make sure that if you're picking a new question that is not on the list, it can't just be a personal preference survey. Number 3, you must be able to complete the experiment in the span of 1 week. So we're not doing anything that involves growing a plant from seed to adult. We're not doing anything where you have to watch how mold is growing for over a month or things like that. You really need to make sure that you can do it in under a week. Not the whole paper, but the experiment itself should be done in under a week. And lastly, your teacher must approve it before it can be your final choice. This way you can actually get it checked to make sure that it is in fact a testable question. And again, go ahead and pause here to take another minute to finish choosing a testable question or writing your own. Now that you have your testable question chosen, start creating a list of materials you need in the table in your notes. Ask your teacher for any rules you may have about ordering or buying supplies. This table is found in your notes for you to fill out. Also, while creating a list of materials, you can check that section in your testable questions bank. And as always, make sure you talk to your teacher to see if there are any special rules about how your school is ordering supplies or which supplies you would need to be responsible for on your own. You can go ahead and pause the video here while you create your materials list. And to wrap up our lesson for the day, this is what you can continue for the rest of class if you have some extra work time, or what you can do at home independently. But in order to be successful for the next class, you need to bring your final choice for your testable question, and that will need to be submitted to your teacher. The second thing you need is your materials list, especially if your teacher needs to help you order supplies. And 3, you can start brainstorming how you want to conduct your experiment. That one is more optional, but it's a really good idea to get ahead, especially if you have extra time. Make sure that all items are turned in according to your teacher's directions. This may be turned in virtually or on paper. Please make sure that you check with your teacher. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I will see you for the next lesson.